Hey, everybody, welcome back to another Motivation Monday podcast for Monday, November 27th, 2017. I hope everybody had an awesome Thanksgiving and you're starting to get back into real life all right. I hope the food hangover wasn't that bad because here we go. We're on this stretch until Christmas now and the holidays that come in December. Okay, so today what I wanted to talk about was I wanted to read you a paragraph from the amazing book by Robert Greene called Mastery. If you're a musician or anything else in life, and obviously you are a musician if you're listening to this podcast, this book is excellent. It really talks about all of the different keys to mastery and mastering whatever your chosen path in life is. And it has some really eye-opening stuff in it. This is from the first section of the book on being an apprentice and how that leads toward mastery. So I figured this would be a really cool thing to talk about. And so much of the stuff in this book relates to music and even has some really cool anecdotes from Coltrane, is the person that he sort of chose in the musical field to reflect upon and prove some of his points. And I don't think there's anybody better than Coltrane to really, when you talk about somebody who had truly mastered their instrument and had mastered themselves in terms of discipline and getting better every single day and pushing towards something in his head that he knew he had to achieve. So in this paragraph of the book, he's talking about the medieval form of apprenticeship and, what went into this and how it can relate to our modern day lives. So he says, because of few books or drawings that existed at the time, apprentices would learn the trade by watching masters and imitating them as closely as possible. They learned through endless repetition and hands-on work with very little verbal instruction. Because resources such as textiles, wood, and metals were expensive and could not be wasted on practice runs, apprentices would spend most of their time working directly on materials that would be used for the final product. They had to learn how to focus deeply on their work and not make mistakes. So some of this stuff is very, very applicable to us as musicians, and some of it not so much. When you're playing music, you definitely are going to make mistakes and sound horrible on your way to learning. And luckily, we're not using something that is a hard product that there's only so much of. All we really use is our time, right? And making mistakes and trial runs and stuff like that is actually very worth our time in music. But I want to go back to the beginning of that paragraph where he talks about how much time apprentices spent watching and observing masters and the nonverbal instruction part of this. So a big part of our podcast and a big part of my teaching process and a lot of teachers' jazz teaching process is to tell you to check out the recordings of the masters. Now, this is really cool because while we weren't alive in the time that the masters were alive, or at least a lot of the masters that pioneered this art form back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, we have this incredible ability to observe their work through recordings. And I always talk about how we should be doing the majority of our learning from listening and imitating. And that's part of that nonverbal teaching. You can't have Charlie Parker in the same room as you explaining what he was thinking about over chord changes. But what we do have is this incredible recorded history of Charlie Parker putting his thoughts into action. And that we can observe very, very closely and imitate. So, I think a lot of times my breath is wasted on a lot of students where I say, you cannot be a good jazz musician without getting deep into the recordings and imitating the masters. Now, Robert Greene sort of backs me up on this and explains this apprenticeship program where you cannot be good at something without being an apprentice first. So what I would like you to focus on this week is really being an apprentice of the jazz masters. And the only way to do this is to really sit with the recordings and spend a lot of time listening, playing along, trying to match their style, and trying to observe and absorb what they were doing and put it into our own playing. We're never going to learn how to swing properly unless we try to play along with some of the most swinging musicians out there. We're never going to learn how to make that same sound over a 251 that Coltrane did unless we listen to, observe, and ultimately try to imitate what Coltrane did over those same chord progressions that we're playing over. So it's a simple process, but I think so many times people think they can just pick up a book and sort of learn this through osmosis, but you have to learn it through osmosis with the recordings. You cannot ignore the recordings. And if I sound very passionate and somewhat frustrated about this, it's because I am, because I tell my students week after week after week, you have to be listening to this music on a regular, everyday basis. And so few of them do it that it is kind of frustrating. But I'll tell you what, I can tell immediately my students that actually do it because they start to sound like real and authentic jazz musicians, as opposed to the ones that tell me that they're going to check out the recordings and then they actually don't. So commit yourself to being an apprentice of the masters this week. Take Robert Greene's words very seriously. And if you're interested in this book, it has such amazing content in it. Go out and get Robert Greene's book, Mastery. All right? All right, we'll see you later this week for a regularly scheduled program. And again, I hope everybody had a fantastic Thanksgiving, a great weekend with friends and family. And we'll see you later on this week. Have a good one, everybody.